My name is Bill Wright, and I'm the Tile and Stone Technical Manager for Stone Tile International. A little bit about myself. I'm fourth generation in the Tile and Stone building. When we were talking to the mayor of Mississauga, I was telling her how my grandfather supplied the tile to the first Square One shopping center when it was originally built. So for the last 100 years, there's been somebody from my family in the tile and stone business in Canada, which just means we're not very inventive. We do the same thing, and I'm old. But thank you for coming out. I'd like to welcome our guests from around the globe, from Brazil, Canada, China, the Czech Republic, Egypt, India, Italy, Pakistan, Peru, Portugal, Saudi Arabia, Spain, Turkey, and the USA. We have a stellar panel here, well over a century's experience here this morning. First, we have Dale Kempster. He's the Technical Director for Schluter Systems Canada. He's been with Schluter for over 30 years. He's currently the President of the Material Methods and Standards Association in the U.S. He's an active member of the Trouser Tile and Marble Association and a past director. We have Sherri Wildman, currently the Architectural Manager for Canada for Ardex Engineered Cements. She's been in the construction industry for 25 years, a longtime member again of the Trouser Tile and Marble Association Canada and CSC Construction Specifications. And rounding out the panel, we have Karl, Hanley, 15 years of experience in the construction industry in both Europe and North America. He's with Centura Tile. Comes with a very well-rounded understanding of the flooring market, working in many different parts of the industry, installation, distribution, and manufacturing. So that's your panel this morning. We're going to have a little bit of a PowerPoint presentation. Are we taking questions as we go or as we go? So we're going to take questions as we go along. So if you have a question, again, please remember to come up to the microphone and ask your question. And somewhere amongst the four of us, we'll make sure to try and get it answered as best as we can for you. Thank you. Go ahead there.
All right. Good morning. I'm in control of the PowerPoint, but I won't be doing all the talking. But just to kind of set up the landscape a little bit, we have some nice beauty shots here of the large format tile, or there's the other term that's being largely used now, no pun intended, is gauge porcelain or porcelain slabs / panels. And there's a perfect example being shown here on top. You see the ceiling portion where the columns are, those are large porcelain panels that were utilized in this mall application. We're using it over existing structures as well. In this particular application, they're going directly over concrete slabs and making it very nicely decorated. Car showrooms, very common application now with these large tile panels. Some things you may not be aware of, they're actually using some of these panels for doing doors and doing cabinetry. They also, and this is why they've come up with the term still of gauge porcelain, because they now have thicknesses as thick as 12.5 millimeters or half inch in thickness. And those thicknesses, and unfortunately I don't have a picture of that. I probably have someone somewhere, but I didn't find it. Where they use it for actual executive, desks and tables in an office. I'm sorry, and countertops, of course. This is why it's now been changed from before. It was just porcelain panels or slabs, and now we call it also gauge porcelain because there's such a range of thicknesses now that they've developed. And there you can see the advantage too, because they're so thin, and the range of thicknesses can go from as thin as 3 millimeter, 1/8 of an inch, all the way now to half inch in thickness. So the thinner versions, which is what's being used here, you can see they can cut them and create a nice radius around a column and doing cabinetry work and things of that nature. And there you can kind of put that in perspective. There's a relatively large porcelain panel being displayed in this showroom. And what's the largest you figure that's out there right now?
About 1,600 by about 3,200 is the biggest we're seeing out there at the moment in the 12 mil. In the other thicknesses, it's generally still 1 meter by 3 meter.
Right. So, and it's growing all the time. And to let you know, I mean, this is not just a fad. These large porcelain panel technology has been invested by the tile manufacturers with millions upon millions of dollars. They've put a lot of investment into this. So this is not just a little phase of the industry. They're here, and they're fad. So we'll be seeing these from now on and becoming bigger and bigger part of our industry. Another aspect here, and maybe I'll let one of you guys talk, was remodeling. This is a very common application for these type of panels because there's a lot of advantages, and maybe you want to...
Yeah, some of the advantages we see with these tiles, there are several different types, everywhere from the aesthetic advantage, you get this very nice, clean, modern look, to the application itself. You get also mechanical advantages, very, very abrasion resistant, very scratch resistant. Graffiti doesn't stick to it many times. Very impact resistant. So overall, they mechanically are a great choice as well. And then sustainability-wise, they're very lightweight, so shipping becomes a little easier. They are 100% recyclable. You can just grind them up and put them back into the earth, and they are as what they were. Am I missing anything, Bill? Karl?
I mean, the only thing I'd say is, like, when you look at this picture here, you see a washroom from the 1960s and renovated to 2014, I think is on that. A lot of these tiles, when they first came out, their original thickness, the 3.5 mil and the 100 by 300, the primary focus and aim was the renovation market, the cost savings associated with using these thin tiles over top of existing substrates. The cost factors reduce the overall cost of the job because you're saving on the removal and the replacement of the existing tiles that are in place. So you're saving all of those costs and you're installing the new tiles over top of the existing. Yeah, you can see the cost breakdown there. You can see that the larger panels actually save overall the cost on the project from removal, disposal, prepping your substrates, and then reinstalling the new tiles.
That's one of the big advantages certainly with the 3.5 thickness, is the opportunity to eliminate the whole demo portion of the remodeling. Most often, you don't have to change the door casings. They're usually thick enough that you can match up nicely to those. Between the mortar, generally we're already dealing with a flat substrate, so you just have the mortar to install the panels with. You might be adding, maybe a half an inch, a little less than that, to the thickness of the wall. You can certainly pull out most electrical a half an inch. So it makes it very, very easy. We see a lot of this in terms of commercial lobbies, office lobbies, office tower washrooms, certainly hospitals, and certainly residential, because of that very quick turnaround, and you end up with a beautiful modern look as a result.
One of the other things I want to mention is the variety of looks we can achieve with thin panels. The technology today is like none other. You can get a porcelain tile that mimics a natural stone as close as the natural stone was. So you can get pretty much any look, whether it be a metal oxide, a wood look, a solid look, a cement look, wood look again. Leather. There are several different looks. The sky is the limit when it comes to the large panels or large format in general. The technology in the designs is fantastic.
One of the other advantages in a lot of sort of educational, institutional, sort of the student residences and things like that, the larger format tiles save on the overall maintenance and cleaning because you have fewer grout joints, fewer opportunities for mold and mildew and things like that to grow in corners. So a lot of them are starting to use the larger panel tiles in renovation projects and even in new projects because it saves them on the overall maintenance and cleaning aspects. It's easier to keep.
It's funny, when I first started selling tile, we didn't have large porcelain tile. We had little porcelain mosaics, and if you're lucky, you get them up to a 3x3. And then they started coming out with large porcelain tiles, super large porcelain tiles. And 30 years ago, that was a 12 by 12. And we certainly fast-forwarded well past that now to with this advent of inkjet technology, they can reproduce anything now onto the face of a porcelain tile. You hold a real natural stone next to the porcelain copy of it, and you can't tell the difference between the two. Where they can texture the finish to make it look like a brush finish or a textured flame type of finish, and you can't tell one from the other until you flip them over and look at the back. It's just astounding what the technology's become. Yeah, we've got two technologies. We've got the Lamina Method and we've got the Continuum Method. Lamina is pressed onto a large metal plate with no edges. So you've got a great big plate that comes down, vibrates it, holds it there. Yeah, the top picture there. You can see it. It comes down, the edges are free, so there's no internal pressure. All the air gets to escape through the edge. The nice thing about that technology is there's no real internal pressure. Sometimes if it's pressed into a mold, there's a lot of tension still within the tile, and it makes it difficult to work with. With the free edges, the air comes out. The edges, there's no internal pressure. It makes it very, very easy. The other method is the Continuum Method. It's a little bit like a hero sandwich. It goes down an assembly line, and each little station adds something to the face of the tile, and then it goes through a great big rolling drum, and it's pressed into place. And from there, they both go on to the kiln. Two good methods. Both are still popular. Both available in the inkjet type of technology. We're getting there.
So this technology is still, especially in North America, relatively new. I mean, I remember about 5 years ago when it first entered into the market in North America, there was a huge concern, especially by labor, on how do you install this stuff. It's not the same as regular tile. It looks like tile, but extremely on steroids. And the reality is that you can't install it the same way as normal tile. Now, what was really outstanding, I've never seen this done before, is that they created an ANSI standard. And I sit on a lot of different committees, and I've created ANSI standards myself as a chairman. And typically, they usually take anywhere from 8, 10, 12 years before they come to fruition. This particular standard was created in 2 years. And one of the reasons for it was the lead on it, the chairman was Noah Chitty, who's from Crossville, which is highly aligned with one of the manufacturers we just showed there of the technology, which is Lamina. So this has been huge for them to come out with not only an installation standard, but also the performance standard for the product. Which my hat is off to them because it's not easy. I've done it myself, and it takes a lot of work and a lot of people making concessions. There was a lot of back and forth and what have you. So this new standard is now just literally was released 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, I should say. Well, I guess what covering is now is what, a month ago? So it was actually released at the show in Orlando recently, the biggest tile show in North America.
When we came out with this standard, this standard is for interior applications. There was a lot of input from the Canadian market onto this standard as well. Canadians are a little more European in terms of their thinking, in terms of design. We sell an awful lot of large panels, gauge thin panels in Canada in comparison to the United States. So we're able to provide a lot of very current information on the methods and the products we were using here. This standard, like Dale said, was published a month ago. We've just started working on a standard or investigating a standard for exteriors, and that'll probably take about the same time, 18 months, 2 years to get back to work. Yeah, maybe a little longer, but again, that's another application. We've talked about a lot of interior applications for the large gauge thin porcelain tiles, but certainly the exterior market's a very, very large growing segment of it.
One of the things to remember as well, I mean, large format tiles, by definition, in the past have always been anything with one edge greater than 15 inches. So when we start getting into these larger, thin porcelain tiles, gauge porcelain panels, the standards had to be rewritten because the typical installation methods, as we've kind of indicated to, didn't apply in the case of these large formats, these thinner panels, because the access to job sites, the requirements and tooling for a successful installation are a little bit different to what you typically associate with the traditional large format tile.
And just to qualify the official terminology, you can see right there on the slide that when you have a gauge porcelain tile, originally when it first came out, they actually tried to call it porcelain tile slabs. And to me, when that first came out, this is when they only had really the very thin tiles. I was at ISO meetings. I represent Canada for ISO, and I brought it up to the whole group and said, well, it's a contradictory term. When we think of slab, we think of something very thick. So how can we call this a slab? You're making people, especially in North America, think that it's going to be something that's contradictory to what it really is. So now the terminology is that they use gauge porcelain to kind of incorporate the fact that, you know, anything less than a square meter is going to be gauge porcelain, and it can be any thickness, really. I mean, right now it's, you know, it can be as thin as 3 millimeter, and it's going up to ½ inch, but who knows, down the road they may be going even larger than that. 3/4 inch. You got 20 millimeter porcelain pavers, for instance, which would also qualify in there. And then you've got the gauge porcelain tile panels / slabs. Those are now technically defined as being 1 square meter or larger. So trying to, I guess, make it so it's not so confusing when the terminology is being used. But I think marketing is going to jump in, and I would imagine that probably the more popular term is going to probably be gauged. At least that's what I hear through the reference. Yeah. So this is the actual standard itself, and who's got better eyes than me? Can you read it out?
The heading?
Yeah.
The American National Standard Specifications for Gauged Porcelain Tile and Gauged Porcelain Tile Panels / Slabs, Material and Installation Standards.
Right. So pretty large name, but it's trying to wrap itself around all the different technology terms that have been used now, and I think the main thing is now we do have an installation standard as well as a performance standard. Here we're talking about the subfloor preparation, so I think I'm going to let Sherri talk a little bit about.
Sure, absolutely. So along with all the advantages to large format tile that we spoke about earlier, there are several challenges that we need to address and make sure that we are on top of. Handling and tooling is a big one. Installation methods become a little different than a typical maybe 12 by 24. Substrate preparation becomes paramount. We really need to make sure that we are on top of substrate preparation with these tiles. Any sort of undulation in that floor or any movement is going to become apparent, not just on the floor, but on wall surfaces as well. So we need to make sure that we're addressing both horizontal and vertical substrates when we're talking about installation. Typically with a floor tile installation, we want to see straight edge method of levelness to be an 1/8 and 10 with no more than 1/16 of an inch over 24 inches. So we want to make sure that we have a nice flat, smooth floor. And on the wall, we're an 1/8 and 8 feet. So again, making sure that your wall surface is absolutely smooth and flat is also imperative when putting up not just thin panels, but large format. If you think about lighting, we have lighting that directly shines right down on those walls, and it'll highlight any lippage, any undulation at all. So making sure that we put time and energy into specifying the proper methods is going to be absolutely paramount to the success of the installation itself.
We also prefer that it's going over cementitious or cement-based substrates. Even for walls, we prefer cement board to drywall or some type of cement board type of construction. We find that traditional gypsum drywall has just too much flimsiness to it, especially with this lightweight construction. You know, any bit of play doesn't seem to work very well. So we want a nice stiff substrate. And for the floors, the same thing. We have done some construction over wood. In wood, we generally want 50 millimeter mortar bed, dry pack over top of that before we put down the tile.
That's where there's a little parting in the ways of this.
Yeah, there's a little bit of that, but and again, for the flooring, you can only use the 5.6 or better. For walls, generally it's 3.5, but you could use the 5.6 if you wanted.
Another key to installations is when we are doing tile over tile installations on wall is to make sure that we can support the full system, making sure that the bond with those existing tiles are clean, smooth, and solid, and they can support a full system. So you're talking about mortar on top of that, grout on top of that, and tile on top of that. You want to make sure that you have a good adhesion of the tile that's on there first, just before we do that. Okay.
The tiles themselves, like if you take the 3.5 mil porcelain, the gauge porcelain panels, I mean they're adding a £1.50 per square foot for just the tile itself. You have to add in, as Sherri said, the mortar and grout and things like that. But even equally as important when you're installing these tiles is controlling the lippage, using sort of leveling systems to ensure that you have no lippage, whether it's on the wall or the floor. If you look at a 3.5 mil tile, if you've got any little bit of lippage in it at all, there isn't enough body in the tile to afford you any lippage on the wall. They're all rectified edges, so you can't hide a little bit of lippage in the grout or anything like that you could with a pillowed edge tile. So it makes the installation and the preparation crucial to a successful outcome.
And I just included this little excerpt here. This is from our 093,000 manual from the TTMAC. And basically this is the specification in the back of our manual, and it basically talks about the flat numbers that are required, which reflect the numbers that Sherri just mentioned on what we require before we install the tile. So we've already incorporated this into the Canadian manual, and we're going to be updating the manual for specifications with an addendum for this year, and then we'll be doing a new reprint and revision for next year with all the new changes. And there's been a lot. It's our industry is growing so quickly now. I mean, we try and revise our manual every 2 years, and it's almost becoming a point we might have to do it every year because we just got so much coming up now with new technology.
Just before he moves on, the best the cement guys can do in terms of floor flatness is 1/4 inch and 10 feet. And that's if you're dead on and, that you've got the best cement guy in town if he's giving you floors that are 1/4 inch and 10 feet. Unfortunately, like Sherri said, we need 1/8 inch and 10 feet. So there's always going to be some type of preparation, and that has to be factored in to ensure that we have a good flat substrate to start with and a good flat outcome.
Yeah. And maybe just to continue on that, in the manual, actually a little bit further down that page, you'll see that the gentleman who actually put this master spec together for us is one of the top spec writers in all of Canada, Keith Robinson. Say Richards. Yeah, a little bit of a slip there. And he has won awards for his spec writing, and he actually has a lot of architectural offices that will take his lead on his specs. And so in that spec, he actually calls out that it's absolutely critical that there be an allocation for money to be for the preparation, because almost always, just like Bill said, the floor is not going to be appropriate. It needs to be leveled. That's where a lot of the leveling technology comes out, like Sherri represents for Ardex. Maybe I shouldn't have said that out. But the reality is that it is an issue that preparation is the biggest part of a successful installation. If the floor is not flat, you're going to have all types of issues. This next slide here, this is showing a testing apparatus called the Robinson Floor Test, ASTM C627, and this has become really one of the key test methods that is used in our industry. It's a very destructive test. If you look at it, you can see there's a carriage with 3 wheels, and then there's weights on top of it, and we have a total of 900 pounds of weight that go on top of this. And we have 3 types of wheels that are used. And so they start off with a soft rubber wheel, and we start off with 300 pounds for one cycle. 900 revolutions takes 1 hour, and after the cycle is done, they take a look at the tile and the grout to see if there's any cracks, popping of the grout, chipping of the tile, anything of destructive nature. And if it's clean and it has passed, then they go to the next cycle. They add another 300 pounds, 600, run it again with the same soft rubber wheels. If it passes, they go to the third cycle and they make it 900 pounds. And then after they've done that, if they've got 3 cycles without any damage, they literally then have now what we call a residential rating. So you can use it in a residential application, but not for commercial. If you want to go to commercial, then we do the 4th cycle, which we actually repeat the 900 pounds on the soft rubber wheels. And then why they do that, I don't know. It's been around for so long. Nobody's alive that can tell us why they repeat that cycle is. I've actually posed that question because I'm on the ASTM C21, which actually governs that test method. Anyways, then we go to cycle 5, and we go to a hard plastic wheel, and we start off again at 300 pounds. Then we go to cycle 6, we do 600 pounds. And after we pass cycle 6, if there's no evidence of damage, and this is where the key comes in, we now have a light commercial rating. And what was interesting is that most of these tiles don't go much past light commercial. And even if you have the best installation possible, this actual photo is from the lab of one of our adhesive manufacturers, and they've done a tremendous amount of testing on these tiles. And I know that the technical director for this company, and he sits on some committees with me, and we've discussed their results, and he basically identified that it doesn't matter what the coverage is, and typically they got 100%, which is not that easy to do, but in a lab it's a little bit easier because it's all controlled. And he said, after you get into light commercial, even the best installation, the tile edges have a tendency of chipping and cracking. And that's, from heavy loads going across it. There's a certain amount of what you would call stress and strain that occurs when you have a load going across the floor. And those tiles, when you get to the point where you have enough weight with a hard plastic wheel, when we get into cycles 8 and 9, they typically can't last. So you'll see that there's usually a restriction for these tiles, that they're for light commercial. They don't want to get into anything where there's going to be, heavy loads of pallet jacks, scissor lifts going across, or maybe not so much scissor lifts because those aren't so difficult. But some of these scraping machines they have to be careful with because they can cause damage. But this is a very commonly used test method. We have one at the TTMAC, which is constantly being used. We've just got the newest version. We just bought a brand new machine for testing. So any of you manufacturers out there that want to put your products to the Robinson floor test, we do have that available. The cost really depends on what you're trying to do. This particular one they're showing here is a wood frame construction that's suspended. That's going to probably cost you around $2,500. If it's a standard concrete 4x4 pad, which is what most cases they're testing, especially as Bill mentioned, is what we really like to see these porcelain panels being used on. You're looking more around $1,800. So, no, it really is not for a type of test and the professionalism you get, because you get a written certificate of what level you received, and it's recognized as third-party testing. And we have architects that will send material to us to verify that the system that they specified will actually perform. In some cases, we've even had companies that are in the R&D level, and they're trying to see whether their product will perform. Very big area right now is sound control. A lot of sound control materials are being sent there. Problem with sound control is that to have something like that absorb sound, it usually has to be forgiving, and certainly it reduces the load-bearing capability. So this test, it shows you very quickly whether it's going to be able to withstand the environment it's involved in. If it has heavy weights, in many cases, these products can't survive.
Most of us actually work, on the technical side of the tile business. Recently, I had occasion to go to a job site. We'd had a failure with an install. And they had all the people involved in the different parts of the assembly come to site, and there were 6 of us. And then myself as a supplier, somebody else is the mortar manufacturer, somebody else is the waterproofing, somebody else is the self-leveler. And it became quite apparent on site at the site meeting that, half of the products didn't work well together or didn't bond to each other properly. Nobody had a warranted, tested system. If they talked to any one of the 6 of us individually, we could have come up with a complete system of all parts that work together. So in light of that, certainly something like the Robinson floor test would have identified, quite quickly how well things would have done. And this was a shopping mall. It was a very, very big job. Luckily, it was just a little test area, and we could work out the bugs from there. But it's important to make sure that all parts going in to make things do work together.
It truly is a system test, and actually we've even had people use it as almost an abrasion test to see whether the tile would be able to withstand the environment that it was being specified for. We had one where in Vancouver where they were going to use a tumbled stone in a picnic in the park area, where you got people with grocery carts and all types of vehicular materials going across, and the material didn't even last 3 cycles, and we had to turn the machine off because it was bouncing so badly with the lippage between the tumbled stone, and also within those 3 cycles there was a wheel path that was worn already into the stone. So it was actually very good for the consultant because he was able to prove that there was absolutely no way this product could be used in that type of environment.
Handling, that's a crucial part of these tiles. Given their size, they're shipped in crates. They're moved around in large crates that are on average about 3.5 feet by 10 feet long. So they are quite a consideration to take account of when you're specifying these tiles, whether you're delivering them to a job site or a residential home. It's important to consider access and availability of the proper equipment to take these crates off of trucks or tractor trailers or whatever it is. And then once you get that crate into site, you have to have the right equipment, the suction cups, the A-frames, the carts, things like that, to be able to handle and move these tiles successfully. There are a number of different types of suction cup frames out there. Some of them are just a manual push-down handle that sort of bite onto the surface of the tile. Some of them you can buy pneumatic ones that they engage a compressor and a pump, and that you're biting onto the surface of the tile. But as these tiles have grown and developed, you've gone from sort of the flat matte finish to the textured surfaces to the polished surfaces. So it's important that you're using the right equipment, because obviously when you're using the polished tiles or the textured surfaces, getting that suction, getting that bite onto the surface isn't as easy as it once was. A lot of the suction cups and frames have gauges on them so that you can see that those suction cups on the tiles are engaged with the tile before you pick it up and move it. So you're minimizing the breakage and things like that. These types of tables, you can see in the picture on the right there are work tables and A-frame carts that you can hang the tile with the suction cup onto the cart so that you can spread the mortar on the reverse of the tile. Because not only are you putting mortar on the substrate, be it wall or floor, you're also putting it on the back of the tile. So you need to be able to pick up that tile and move it successfully and position it into place once you have your mortar spread on the tile. So the proper equipment is crucial. The right trowels, the suction cups, the A-frames, everything. Even cutting the tile, working with the tile. Your sort of the small score and snap tools that you can use with the 24 by 24, 48 by 48 size tiles don't necessarily work with this because you can't physically put the tile into it. You're cutting and scoring these almost like panes of glass. You're running a track along, you're scoring it, and then you're snapping it to break them. You can do dry cuts with your hand grinders if you have the proper diamond tip blades. And it's critical when you're doing that, even though, as Bill said, in the manufacturing of these tiles, overall the way they're manufactured, there's very little tension, there's very little stress in the tiles. But it is important when you're cutting out your electrical boxes, HVAC vents, things like that, that you drill small little pilot holes before you cut out the full piece. There is very little tension in them, but when you hit it with a blade that's spinning at 4,000 or 5,000 RPM as it's cutting into the tile, you will have little bits of tension in those areas. So it is important to do those pilot holes. So there are little tricks and things like that. They are, overall, when you have the right equipment, they're a very easy tile to work with and install successfully. You want to add anything to that, Bill?
I was just going to add that there's several manufacturers of these products now, and they all have installation manuals, usually available on their website or through your sales staff to have a look at. And those are important to get a copy of and include in your specifications so that the installers have the proper information. Karl and I are a little twisted. We have a little bit of a chuckle this morning before the presentation, talking about some of the things we've come across. Like the gentleman that showed up in a minivan to pick up his sheet, and I'm explaining to him that it's 1 by 3 meter. And the response was, huh? I said, what did you think it was? He says, I thought it was a typo. What am I going to do with this now? He had no idea what he was going to do. Or getting it to site only to find out that it doesn't fit in the elevator. So these are all things to consider, having it craned in during construction, only to find out that you're a couple pieces short, but now the wall's all enclosed, and how are you going to get the rest of it upstairs to do the job? So these are things to take into account.
I think another important factor to consider when we're talking about that is the fact that if we do have miscuts or a boo-boo on a tile, we're looking at 50 to 60 square feet in one tile. That can become a very costly mistake if we don't have the proper procedures and processes in place. So not only do we need to make sure the right tools are put in place to make sure we have a successful installation, but we need extra staff. I mean, there is just no way that we can handle these panels with just one person or even 2 people. We need, 3 or 4 or 5 people on site just for the install alone. So that does add an extra factor when we talk about installation. But at the end of the day, if you're resurfacing, you do save or recoup the cost there. So we do want to make sure that we do have all those things in place just as a precaution to make sure that we do have a successful installation.
I think one of the other things as specifiers to consider, and these standards are available now. You have a benchmark that you can push towards that, your installers, your contractors, you shouldn't be getting pushback from them that, we can't do that, we have to do it this way. The standards are there now to support you and push forward in how these tiles should be installed successfully. Many of the manufacturers, many of the distributors of these tiles, and many of the manufacturers of the mortars and grouts and things like that as well. They all have installation guidebooks, as we've said, but they also do training classes and courses. They invite in the contractors, the installers, even the architects and designers are free to come to see how these tiles are handled, how they're installed, and that kind of training, and they all get certificates at the end of those courses. So you could include that in your specification as well to ensure that you're getting properly qualified installers with experience in working with these tiles.
Yeah, another story to give you is when there has been a big learning curve in handling these products. And one contractor that I are friends with in the United States, based out of Cleveland, was doing a hospital in Chicago. And it was one of his first times he was handling these, back then it was the porcelain panels was the terminology. And he had 100% breakage. So he basically had to buy the tile twice. And things just like Bill mentioned, things that they don't even think about. How do you bring these tiles in an elevator when they're 3 meters tall? Small things or little things like that, which you at first don't even think about. But then when you get to the job site, okay, what do we do here? So there's been a real big learning curve, and to be quite honest, at the beginning there was a lot of pushback from the installers. And they were more or less, saying, well, who's going to warranty this, and how are we supposed to install this properly, and what have you. And very quickly, the industry has adopted, and as has been mentioned, is that there is now training concessions by most of the manufacturers. And the United States even gone one step further. They actually now have a certification program that is done by a third party, the CTF / the National Tile Contractors Association, which at this point in time, we don't have a replica in Canada, but we're very heavily involved with the TTMAC. So this is something we're going to take a lot closer look at, and maybe down in the future we would also be able to offer maybe a mirror certification program.
In the early days, we had 3 millimeter, which is the standard porcelain sheet without any fiberglass mesh, and the industry soon found that they didn't seem to twist very well. You had to be a little more ginger with the way you were treating them than you would with something that was a centimeter thick. So the industry decided, we'll make it a little stiffer, a little stronger. We'll put fiberglass on the back of it, change the thickness to 3.5, and we've had much better results in terms of handling that. Now we've got a much more rigid sheet to deal with, and certainly the 5.6 is even more rigid than that. So yeah, in the early days there were, people were taking a little, they were being a little rough with it, and we had some learning, but now things have gotten much better in terms of the way they've been told to handle things.
You can see in the picture on the left there that the trowel is sort of a slant notch. It's a little bit different to your typical square notch or round notch trowel. And that's an important factor when you're using trowels on the back of these tiles and on the wall or floor. These are slant notch trowels, so that when you pick up and place these tiles, the adhesive locks in together, because you're troweling the adhesive in the same direction on the back of the tile as you are on the substrate. You're not troweling in circles and waves and swooshes and things like that quite often you'll see tilers trying to do on job sites. I think they think they're colouring pictures or something. But it is important to trowel your mortar on your substrate and on the back of your tile in the same direction. Because of the size of the tiles, once you position and place them onto your substrate, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to pick them up and check the back of the tile or add in a little bit extra mortar, because the wet suction in your adhesive is going to prevent you from picking up that tile again. So it is crucial that you're using the right trowels for your substrate and the back of your tile.
There are 3 basic keys to making sure you have a really great installation. One is the mortar itself. 2 is to make sure that when you are applying that mortar that you're getting 95% coverage. And 3 is to make sure that you expel all air to eliminate any impact damage that you could see in that tile by leaving that air in there. So those are really important factors. And as Karl said, aligning those ridges in that fashion will allow us to expel the air very, very easy. We spoke a little bit earlier about lippage and making sure that we have eliminated all lippage. We talk in all these terms, and I'm sure that we hear them all day long, but if you have a question and you don't know what we're talking about when we talk about lippage or a standard and we use acronyms, please feel free to stand up. We forget sometimes that we're even talking about them, so feel free to ask. But we do want to eliminate lippage and make sure that it is gone, because that becomes a weak point in the installation, as well as, there we go. That's an exact picture right there of what we're talking about with lippage. So we have these edge leveling systems that we can use in conjunction with good substrate preparation to make sure that we are eliminating that lippage. This is just one series. There's many different options available. We also want to vibrate or eliminate any air behind that tile. You can do that several ways. Some people tamp the tile. There are special weighted tampers that we can use for that. On a horizontal surface, there's a special walk pattern that you can walk over tiles to make sure that you are eliminating the air from the middle of that installation. Or there's vibrators, as you see in the picture here, that you can use to make sure that air is expelled as well.
But one point, though, and this is really important because some installers have tried to cheat, is that when you're using these lippage control systems, they're really for very small adjustments. You're not going to go more than maybe a millimeter up or down If you have to do more, it's because, again, proper preparation of the floor was not done. And because typically one thing that's nice about these tiles, and as has been mentioned, is there's no tension really in them. They're very, very in a relaxed state, so to speak. So one of the advantages is in most porcelain smaller format tiles, especially rectangular, the rule is that you can't do more than a 30% offset. If you do 50%, then most of these the smaller format porcelains have built-in tension, and they'll have a little bit of a convex configuration to them. And if you do a 50% offset, well, the end of the tile is going to be in the middle of that convex curve, and you're now going to have a high point that there's just nothing you can do about. These tiles, you can actually do a 50% offset, which is very favorable for whatever reason by designers and architects. But the self-leveling lipid control systems are really just to make these small, intricate adjustments, not to be used to try and make up for the floor not being properly level.
Yeah, they're to be used with substrate preparation, not as a means to eliminate sub-preparation.
There are many different types of lipid control systems. There's thumb screw ones that you can twist down onto the surface of the tile. There's wedges and clips that you can use. But the important thing to remember is no matter which system you're using, you can see the little palm sander in the bottom image there. You were using that palm sander around the clips or the thumb screw that's coming up, and you're vibrating and setting all that mortar in and around all those clips before you twist down on it, before you put in your wedge, before you do any of those things, because you want to ensure that you have 95 to 100% coverage at the reverse of every bit of that tile.
Yeah, very important is the movement joint aspect for these materials. In some cases, depending on the size, almost every joint really should be required with a movement joint. We basically follow the same recommendations as we have in our detail in the 093,000 manual, 301 MJ. Basically for interior applications with sunlight or exterior applications, and we're mostly talking interior, so obviously it's 8 to 12 feet. In areas that are controlled, where there's no sunlight in that, then we go to like 16 to 20 feet. And this is also called out in the ANSI 108.19 standard.
I got called to a job site not long ago. It was about 6 months old, and they put the panels up on a wall, floor to ceiling, with no joints, all butt jointed. And a nice bright lobby, lots of sunlight, great thermal expansion. Sure enough, the tile bowed off the wall, and it's going to have to be removed and replaced. We can't butt joint any tile, let alone something that size. The next day I was off seeing a specifier, and they were explaining what they want to do, almost like the same lobby I'd seen the day before. And I said, what about the joint spacing and expansion joints? She said, oh, I don't want any of that stuff. I want them all tight jointed. So let me show you a picture on my phone. And I showed her the picture, and it's like, okay, well, we're going to put joints wherever you want me to put them. I said, that's a good idea, because nobody likes a failure. So it's really important, floors and walls. We need allowances for spacing and grout joints.
And just an easy stat to show you why it's so needed is that the coefficient of thermal expansion and contraction, when you have it bonded especially to a cementitious material, the difference between the cementitious material and a porcelain tile is about 4 to 1, meaning the concrete will expand and contract 4 times faster and more than the tile on top of it. So the reality is it's extremely critical, especially with, whether we like it or not, grout used to be our savior. Having a cracked grout joint is not so difficult to deal with. Having a crack in the middle of your tile it's a problem. And it's 1 meter by 3 meters, it's a huge problem because you're probably looking at $800 per tile, and then never mind trying to take it up and put another one back in. It's extremely expensive. So it's really, really critical now. And I know for a fact that there was a lot of testing that was done on what was the best type of products to be used and width of the actual movement joint itself by the participants when they created this standard. So they know for a fact that this is absolutely critical for successful installation.
When we talk about grout joints, or when we talk about movement joints within these applications, if we go back to the standard that Dale just told us about, and we talk about in moisture or sunlight, 9 times out of 10, we're seeing these huge expansive spaces that have been opened right up because we want this open floor living and very open spaces with lots of windows. We do see a lot of movement in those tiles. So using a soft joint or a prefabricated profile becomes your best friend. And when we talk about the fact that we are every 10 feet in some cases with tiles, you're seeing one almost in every single joint. So a lot of times installations on walls where we have large expanse of sunlight or a large bank of tiles, we're seeing all soft joints, and we're eliminating the grout completely just to make sure that we do have that stability in that installation.
We're not saying all these things to try and scare you on these tiles. It's a different mindset. It's a different thought process given the size of them. They've been around for 12, 15 years at this point, these large format tiles. But, as we said at the start, the standard only came out in the last month. They've been evolving and changing over the years. So it is important to be aware of what's out there. There are many, many successful, beautiful installations with these tiles, both wall and floor, and there are dozens of contractors here in the GTA and across the country that can successfully install them. But it is important to be aware of some of the pitfalls so that you have an understanding when you're out there, when you're specifying, when you're looking at these tiles, what you should be watching out for.
Bill?
Please understand that, when we talk about floor prep and wall prep and expansion joints and grout joints and things like that, it applies to all tile and stone installations. Yeah. If they're cheated or skimped on in a smaller format, it might not be as drastically noticeable or apparent. But when you get into these big, large formats, those types of errors and emissions are certainly telegraphed just by the sheer size of the product that we're dealing with. But certainly all these things apply to any type of tile installation.
Just say one thing. One thing that I didn't get a chance to put this couple of photos of, but one thing we do see, not so much with these large panels, but still large format tile, as we indicated, anything with one edge larger than 15 inches. Situation we're seeing a lot, and TTMAC has an inspection committee that gets called up, and we do probably a couple of inspections a week, unfortunately. And one thing that we see, its ugly head coming up all the time, is spot bonding. And for those of you who don't know what spot bonding is where they basically, almost like the lipid control devices we're talking about, people will actually take blobs of mortar, sometimes just regular dry set mortar, which is not meant to be used in very big thicknesses, and they will put a 5-spot. They'll put on all corners, all 4 corners, mortar at a relatively thick level, and then one in the middle to support the middle of the tile. And they'll use that to level off the tile and think that they've done a really good job. And maybe initially, if they're probably well practiced at it, and unfortunately there is some of these guys that have been doing this for a while, it may look good at the beginning, but as things cure and that mortar starts to shrink, then all of a sudden what was perfectly flat now has got lipid all over the place. And if there's any moisture involved, then you're going to see spots where those spot bonds are on it as well. It's unfortunate, but we see it more and more now, and we're trying to get the word out there. So if you get involved with a larger format tile, especially the thick ones that are just over 15 inches, it is not a recognized method. It's a method that was used back in the day with hanging stone on a wall. And they would also use, a pig wire to tie the back of the stone in to mechanically lock it in. It's not meant for floor applications and even wall applications that you hardly ever see it being used anymore.
Yeah, as Dale said, it came from the stone business, from the stone market. Years ago, they would use plaster of Paris, which is a quick, rapid-setting product, along with wire. And how it became somehow incorporated to tile is a mystery to most of us. I'll ask the rest of the panel this question, how many times a week do you hear, I've been doing this for 30 years and I've never had a problem?
Every day.
Do we hear it every 25 years? 25
Always
years?
25.
Yeah, so we all go to sites, we all get phone calls saying, I've been doing this for 25 years and I've never had a problem. And I tell them I've been doing this for 30 years and they get these phone calls 5 times a week. They do fail. It's never been an approved method. We finally put something in the manuals the first time in the 50 years of the Terrazzo Tile and Marble Association's manual that we actually put something in the manual what not to do. Generally, the manuals say do this, do that, do this, do that, and we specifically had to put in the manual in the last edition, do not spot bond. It's never been an approved method to do that.
I just want to add, do I have a few minutes to add?
Yeah, we still do.
Excellent. So I just want to talk a little bit about mortar selection. Coming from the world of mortars and cements and grouts, and also from the architectural world, I see that there is this kind of lack of specification when it comes to installation mortars and making sure that we have the right mortars in place for installations. We just talked about all the different technologies with tile and how fast they've grown. Well, mortar has grown just as fast. So what was okay to just pick up off any shelf for a 12 by 12 doesn't necessarily work the same way as it would for a large format tile. We really want to have a few key items in those mortars that we are looking for. Extended open time. When we talk about open time, we talk about working time. And we talked already about having a 60 or 50 square foot application that we're not only putting mortar on the tile, we're also putting it on the wall. By the time we spread both of those surfaces, we want to ensure that we have still a wet-to-wet application with those. We don't want to see that skimmed out at all. So having a mortar that is engineered specifically with an extended open time for those applications or working time is really, really important. Might not be as important for a 12 by 12, so just making sure that you have the right products in place in your specifications is key. Also making sure that there are new technologies, just looking into them, referencing your manufacturer of both the tile and the setting material, as Bill said, making sure everything's compatible is really, really important. There are several different technologies out there. We have these huge tiles that when we put mortar behind them, sometimes we want to make sure that we have the technology, that we're going to get the proper dry times out of it. We're making sure we get the coverage. We're making sure we get the correct bond. So it is important to make sure that we look into that rather than just leave it to chance or allow your contractor or someone to just pick that for you. Okay?
That's basically the PowerPoint. So
We'll open it up to any questions that the audience may have. Anybody got any questions?
And so to be clear, just on the countertop, it's fine to butt joint.
For a countertop, yeah, it's a little slightly different application. They'll actually epoxy the two pieces together, and you have a very thin pencil line. Mm-hmm. It's a little different than a wall or floor application, so you will have a little bit of a joint, but generally with color match epoxies and a good installer, you're not even going to see it.
Okay, just wanted to be sure we don't need expansion joints everywhere.
No, you need an expansion joint between the counter and the wall.
Yes.
But you don't need one between the sheets on the counter.
Okay, thanks.
And just a little side note, one thing about porcelain is the fact that it's way more durable. I mean, for prestigious reasons, a lot of people still want natural stone, but it needs to be maintained. You need to put sealers on it. You shouldn't be cutting on it. One of the manufacturers of the large porcelain panels actually went to Verona, which is the stone show, and put up a booth, displayed many of their very large panels, and they actually had a big, huge countertop that they made look like Carrara marble, and they had a mime come in, pretend he was cooking, and he was chopping all his food with a large knife right on the actual countertop, and then he had wine, and he spilt his wine a couple of times, pretending he was drunk, and then he would push the material into the sink and continue on. Without having to say anything, it proved the big difference between a porcelain material versus natural stone in that it's way more durable. You don't have to worry about having materials, residue, things with caustic residue on it that would cause etching of the stone. If you don't have a proper sealer on a stone, you put a potato chip on it. See what happens. You're going to have oil being sucked right into the stone. So porcelain does have, for a countertop, it's really an incredible product.
You have a question, sir?
I have two questions. One is about because the size of the panels is often about, it's very large, about 3 meters high. It may happen that part of the panel will be backing to walls with the different thermal masses. Like at the lower portion, you will have a different value at the upper portion. For any reason, it just comes to my mind. So if this case happened, that the back wall, the supporting wall of these panels, facing to two different thermal values because of the thickness of the insulation or the application of the wall, do we need to basically cut the tile or put in two different tiles, or it can afford the stress between these two thermal mass at the back?
Well, for an application like that, in any tile installation, you're going to have perimeter expansion, be it on a wall or a floor, so top and bottom, you're going to have an expansion joint. Now, if you've got very extreme thermal variations, then, each case would have to be assessed individually. But in a typical sort of commercial application, residential application, like if you're talking about around a fireplace or something like that, most of that heat is contained within the sort of the chimney, the flue that takes away the smoke or whatever. They should be insulated. You shouldn't have extreme heat coming out from that's going to... And I spoke to a contractor the other day, actually, and he was concerned. He had that happen on one installation where the chimney wasn't done correctly, and the excessive heat coming out was actually causing the walls, the stud framing, to cup and bow within the chimney column because of the excessive heat, because it wasn't done properly. They're all supposed to be insulated to protect and prevent sort of that excess heat coming out. So if you've got proper expansion joints top and bottom, you shouldn't have those types of concerns.
And the second question, thank you very much for the first response. The second one is about the trowel that has been shown here for installation of these large panels. In the yesterday's presentation, I think it was another room C, it was discussion about the gauged panels, that the trowel that has been recommended was the one with the different depth of notches. Like we will have a short notch and we will have a long notch, and it was just distributed that way. The one that's shown in the picture here was, although angled, but they are all the same depth of notch. Which one is the one that is recommended for the panel?
That slant notch trowel actually comes in a couple of different heights. Right. The key with those large panel tiles, you are using a 3 to 4 mil thickness on the reverse of the tile and 6 to 10 mil on the wall. You want to have even up to 8 on the back of the tile. You want to have an overall mortar thickness on your substrate, be it wall or floor. You want to have somewhere between 10 to 14 millimeters of adhesive behind that tile, so that you get 100% coverage as best as possible, in particular on the floor, and 90 to 100% on the wall. The interlocking nature of that slant notch trowel aids in the compaction of the mortar, the expelling of the air under the tile, to get you that 100% bond. The 4 mil and square notch trowels can be used as well. I'm not saying that the slant notch trowel, and we're not saying that the slant notch trowel is the only one to use. There are a few different. There's another trowel out there called the Euro trowel, which has sort of a zigzag pattern to it,
That's the presentation we did yesterday, and yes, we showed the Euro notch. There are several different trowel configurations. Your best option is to check with the manufacturer of the setting material to see what they recommend. But as Karl said, your best result is to make sure that you get the coverage, and no matter what trowel you're using, it's depending on your setting material, just make sure that it's the right one. So there are several available that you can use or that are recommended for this application.
Thank you very
I'm
much.
pretty sure the new ANSI specification says it's either a slant notch trowel or a Euro notch trowel,
Euro notch,
are the
yeah.
two preferred types of designs.
Thank you.
Did you have a question? No, okay. Okay.
Good morning, everyone. I represent a natural marble and stone company back in the Middle East. So this is why, yes, this is why I'm the black sheep of the audience here. Actually, I came here just to learn from you guys and to gain experience in what you are doing. My first question would be, do these apply also, the recommendations, do they apply to natural stone and marble? Because in my country, we do a lot of large tile formats, not as large as these ones, not 3 meters by 1 meter, but sometimes we go up to 160 by 160 centimeter in tile formats. So do these recommendations apply to what we do also to natural marble? The thickness that we use is always 20 millimeter most of the time.
I guess the first thing that we want to address is that we would have a different setting material for that. Always when we deal with natural stone, we want to make sure that we don't have any issues at all with moisture. So the setting materials are going to be different for sure than what we have spoken about, as well as the trowels and the grouts, that type of thing. So that kind of all falls in line. Absolutely, substrate preparation is going to be right up there with the same kind of configuration. We want to make sure that whether it's patching we use or whether it's self-leveling we use, we want to make sure that we have a completely smooth floor to lay those on to eliminate any lippage. As far as the characteristics of marble or stone, do you guys want to talk about that?
I was just going to say, generally the installation methods are pretty much applicable to whether it's stone or tile in terms of expansion, coverage, things like that. As Sherri said, the mortar selection might change. But it's a pretty general question, and there's a pretty general answer. The basic technique, installation methods should be rather similar between tile and stone, yes.
So currently there's no documentation to handle these tiles, but in marble. There's no standards for marble currently.
There are installation methods for natural stones. Sure, they're included in our manual. Yeah.
Okay.
Right. There's also we have the TTMAC has another manual, the dimensional stone guide for any material thicker than 19 millimeters. So yeah, there is specific information out there for stones. Yeah.
All right. Another question regarding the angled trowel. When you put the adhesive on the substrate and on the tile, the angle is in the same direction, or is it in the opposite direction?
You're troweling your mortar in the same direction so that you're getting the compaction both on the wall and the floor.
So the angles are always like this?
Exactly, so that they're interlocking together. But it's important that, exactly, so that...
It's like a zipper.
Yeah, so that it pulls in together, so that when you're hanging your tile on the wall or placing it on the floor, that everything is compacting in the same direction. It's for ease of application of the mortar, because of the size of them, to ease in that compaction of the mortar. When you're installing a typical large format tile, even a 48 by 48, you can do a little bit of a twist and a push. You can break down those ridges of the mortar to get your compaction underneath. It's very difficult to do that with these larger panel tiles. So I think Sherri mentioned it earlier, you're walking on the tiles. You're doing the shuffle walk, starting in the middle of the tile and working your way out top to bottom. And the standard actually indicates that you are doing that shuffle walk on the tile for a minimum of 4 to 6 minutes to ensure that you're covering the full length and breadth of the tile. So the ridges, the direction of the ridges is crucial. So yeah, you're getting that zipper lock effect that the mortar is all collapsing together and the air is extruded out from under the tile.
Okay, what is the recommended minimum joint width between tiles?
Minimum recommended joint is 1/8 of an inch,
In
3 millimeters.
3 millimeters for large tiles.
Yeah, there's many designers out there, many installers out there that like to go under that, and if they want to do that, that's of their own choice. The reality is, given sort of the construction and things here, the minimum in the standards in the TT Mac book is 1/8 of an inch, 3 millimeters, and that's to allow for that shift and movement to occur naturally.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah, it would be the same application whether it's wall or floor. I mean, there's a couple of things to consider. It's movement, but as Dale mentioned, you also have to get the grout into that joint.
Yes. In our case, the substrate is always cement, and it's hard. We don't use wood in my country. Yeah. We have another advantage, which is the weather. Our variation, it's let's say +5 degrees up to +35, so the gradient is around 30 degrees C. Specifying a 3 millimeter joint, how can I convince the architects and designers to put it? Usually they don't want to see any joints, and for the grouting they always ask us to do a polyester resin, the same material that we use to hide the small holes in the natural stone. Do you have a strategy that you could give me, maybe?
Well, there's specifications certainly in our installation guide,
yes.
But when you're talking a stone, and it might vary in size, plus or minus half a millimeter.
Yes.
There's a millimeter. You're going to at least 2
yes,
millimeters.
There is at least 1 millimeter.
Just to there's your 1 mil right there. So you're going to need at least another millimeter just to be able to stick your shims in, and they're going to be cramped so tight that the contractor is going to lose his mind, and you're going to have chipping edges. So you're going to have to go to 3 millimeters. Otherwise, the joints are going to start to walk, and like I said, the shims go in, but they don't come out so easy. Right. So yeah, you're going to have at least a 2, preferably a 3 millimeter joint.
I think the key to, as you said, getting it specified is education and actually having a frank conversation about grout. We kind of always dismiss grout as it's just grout, but it is a very important aspect to the full system. So the education, talking, having a conversation regarding the grout, and then referencing the TT Mac manual in what is recommended as a standard in the industry is very important.
I'm sure everybody on the panel here has been to a job site, myself included, where the contractor was encouraged by the specifier to have a 1 millimeter joint, only to have it turn out as a disaster. Some places there were a joint, some places there wasn't a joint. The joints were walking, tiles were chipping and cracking. Yeah, I mean, there's a reason why we want things. I know there's a grand scheme of visibility, but there has to be some practicality in terms of how things are installed.
Yes, I totally agree with you.
Yeah, we can use color-matched grouts and silicones and things like that to disguise them a little better, but they cannot be avoided.
One more comment regarding the countertop, the discussion and the demonstration in Verona. Actually, yesterday I just received from a big company in Italy. I don't know if I'm allowed to say their name, okay? They just came up with a product, a revolutionary product, to resolve this issue. I haven't tested it yet, but it seems it works. It's a type of sealer that prevents etching, and it makes the surface 50% harder. And can I say the name?
No.
No? Okay. All right.
Thank you very much.
There is a product for this, okay, to resolve this issue.
Yeah, thank you.
And natural marble is here to stay.
Yeah, of
We've
course
been around for 5,000 years.
5,000
Thank you.
years. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to ask him the name of that product. I have a problem. In fact, I just signed a contract to start a marble installation in the next couple of days, and the engineer specified a 1 millimeter grouting space. I'm disappointed in the show. I know it's the first show in Canada. I'm in a small market in the Caribbean, and from what I'm hearing today, scares me because it seems that, and I have done very little work on ceramic because I've been very busy with marble and granite. But not ceramic, porcelain. The porcelain market is taking over. Okay. And I see, from what you were saying and my observation of the installers in that market, they're doing everything wrong. Next year, assuming there's going to be another show, I would like to suggest that perhaps we put in some demonstrations. As you talked about setting up a certification program as part of it, that I'd like to see, where we can get some trained personnel, bring some people into training. Doesn't matter what the cost is. But I'd also like to see, as part of the show, maybe a little bit more after service. So we've seen stone, a lot of stone. We've all seen that. More up-to-date methods of maintenance. I'd like to see some more of that get into the show as we go forward. It's very much in the model. I've been a member of the International Sanitary Supply Association since 1983. These are the kinds of things that we do. So we deal with that. So sort of the after service. Thank you. That's a suggestion.
Thank you.
Yeah, and just a little side point, we weren't really trying to bash natural stone. And just to let you know, and I'm sure you probably do know, that the usage of natural stone has doubled in the last 5 years, and they're predicting it's going to probably double again. So there's enough room in the marketplace for both products. We're not cannibalizing each other. So.
Just to jump back to the gentleman's question about installation and installers, unfortunately, certainly in Ontario, the tile installation is not a licensed trade. You have to have a license and a certificate in Quebec. You don't have to have one in Toronto. So there are great installers here with plenty of experience, and there's bad installers here. So it's unfortunate, but you really have to be quite diligent in seeing what type of work these people have done before, and follow it up, because it can be a little bit of a hit and miss onto who's doing what. I mean, you're talking about 1 millimeter joints. Now that's pretty much a tip-off that maybe this guy isn't most current in terms of information. But certainly the best thing that anybody can do in their specifications is say that all work has to be done according to the Trouser Tile and Marble Association. And the best thing you can do for yourselves is read the first part of the manual, which is a section called Notes to the Professional. And it outlines most of what we've been talking about here this evening or this morning. And educate yourself. The suppliers will certainly do their best to help you too, but you have to ask the questions. Thank you. Sometimes we do different methods, different products, different technologies in Europe that we don't do here. The islands tend to be a lot more Canadian or North American in terms of the methods that they employ. Maybe try and find somebody local to advise on those types of things. Yes, sir.
Yeah, just a quick question about the cutting method. In the COT show in the seminar they say use glass knife. What would be the cutting for the larger slabs? What tools, machineries?
You're talking about cutting and working with the slabs.
Exactly.
I go back to some of the tools that are available. There are workbenches available that you can place the tiles on. They have movable bars within the table so that you can cut within the tile if you're cutting out electrical boxes and things like that. If you needed to do a cut along the length of the tile, if you were doing a full cut the length of the 3 meters of the tile, there are cutting attachments, free-moving cutting wheels, like a glass scoring wheel, effectively. and you can attach them, you can measure, mark, you can attach them via suction cup, and you can freely move those wheels up and down the tile so that you're scoring, and then you are literally snapping and cutting off that piece. Regular utility knife to cut the fiberglass mesh if you're working with the 3.5 mil, but if it's the 5.6, once you score it and snap it, you've got a clean, nice edge cut. There are polishing pads that you might need to touch up the edge, because once they are a rectified tile, and once you score the edge of that tile and cut it, they can be a little bit sharp. So polishing pads are important just to buff the edge of it so that you don't end up slicing your finger or anything like that. But effectively, they're the same as cutting glass.
I'm a fabricator, so we use the diamond bridge saws to cut. Would that be okay? What should we be careful with those?
A diamond bridge saw is certainly a suitable tool to use. Water jet. When these products first hit the market, yes, we were suggesting something from the glass cutting trade, handheld type of cutter. The cutting manufacturers, equipment manufacturers got on the ball pretty quick and started coming up with larger, extra large, 1-3 meter long score and snap tile cutters that keep a constant pressure on the cut, so you have a nice clean cut. So we've caught up very quickly. I don't know. There's some people maybe using the glass cutter still, but most have gone to these bigger, more commercially manufactured tile cutters for the thin porcelains.
So is there any issue with the bridge saw? Use diamond blade to cut it?
Use a porcelain blade for on a bridge saw, yeah.
There are options available. I mean, the serrated edge blades that you use on the bigger stones aren't necessarily the best ones to use with the porcelain tile. There are continuous rim blades that you can put on your bridge saws that will give you a nice, smooth, even cut on the porcelain tile, because it is that much thinner than your typical stone.
Yeah, we use those certified blade for deck tone. So presumably that should be the good blade to do the cutting.
Again, like I said, if you talk to the supplier, they generally have the manufacturer's technical guide, and they'll tell you what type of blades to use for cutting. It'd be very helpful. Water jet speeds, things like that.
Thank you.
I've got time for one more question. If you can come up to the microphone, please.
What's the recommended minimum thickness for mitering that you shouldn't? Is it 12 mil? Don't do any mitering less than that, or the corners?
Depending on the skill of the trade, I've seen 3.5 mitered. I've seen 5.6 mitered. It's really the proper tool to use. Certainly, a 5.6 is a little easier to keep an ice miter than something a little thinner, but it can be done. It can be fragile. I mean, if it's an outside corner, I'd prefer you have some type of protection on the corner rather than a 45 profile. Yeah.
I mean, I got the 12 number from our fabricator, I think, but I figured I'd ask.
If they're skilled, the 5.6 can be done. They do put a reinforcing mesh or fabric. If you're doing the return on a countertop or something like that, then yeah, they'll typically do a mesh reinforcement on the reverse of it. The color match epoxies work as well with the 5.6 as they do with the 12, but it all depends on the skill of the installer.
And your application. I mean, it would be common sense on where you want to put it is dependent on what thickness you would have there. If you knew it was a large commercial countertop that was going to see a ton of usage, you'd probably want to steer to the 12 mil.
Yeah, and that's one of the main reasons that the 12.5 was brought out, was for the finishing edge that's a lot easier to work with versus the smaller edges and a lot less vulnerable to chipping. I represent a company that makes special profiles that are actually thin, that can be used for the very thin ones, so if you need to protect it on the outer edge, which you definitely do if it's got any type of traffic, then that's probably the better way to go.
Well, I'd certainly like to thank you, the panel, and the audience very much for your participation today. Hand of applause for the panelists.